Morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning briefing for Thursday, 15 May 2025. This is Robert standing in for Mike. Let's get started with Inside the Beltway. 17 Republican lawmakers led by Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton are calling for a ban on the further sales of networking equipment made by TP-Link Systems. And this was in a letter to Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick yesterday. TP-Link Systems has denied that the Chinese Communist Party has any access to any of its equipment or that they have any connection to China. However, according to Chinese government records and announcement, TP-Link does have research and development and manufacturing conducted in China. There's nothing further to report on, or nothing significant to report on hearings today. And then moving on, the Supreme Court is scheduled to hear oral arguments today in an appeal by the Trump administration with the goal of striking down nationwide injunctions. And this appeal stems from a lawsuit that was filed against the Trump administration over an executive order ending birthright citizenship. So the Trump administration is not asking for a ruling on that question of birthright citizenship, but only on nationwide injunctions. And the Supreme Court decision could come within the next month or two due to the immediacy of this issue over the nationwide injunctions. And the Supreme Court ending these nationwide injunctions at district courts would significantly disrupt Trump Resistance 2.0 lawfare efforts, because it would require a lawsuit in each individual district court jurisdiction, which we have seen groups like the ACLU start to do that with some of these immigration lawsuits. Let's move on to our roll-ups for today. In the domestic side, the FDA is opening public comments on what they're calling Operation Stork Speed. And this is an effort to improve the quality of U.S.-made infant formula. And this is a follow-on to a couple of years ago, we covered it, this Chronobacter outbreak that was rampant in U.S. infant formula manufacturing. This initiative was initially launched in March, and the objective is to review infant formula nutrient requirements and also safety standards for things like the cross-contamination of bacteria. Jerry, if you could come on and cover your roll-up items for us, please.
Absolutely. So President Trump secured an investment deal from Qatar during his trip yesterday, and Qatar agreed to purchase several hundred Boeing 787 Dreamliners and another airliner, an extra large airliner. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble saying it. Anyways, this purchase was for $96 billion. And the White House expects this to create annually 154,000 jobs in the United States, with a total production run helping to achieve over 1 million jobs. Now, staying over in the Middle East, the Pakistani officials reached out to the Indian External Affairs Minister Jaishankar to rejoin the Indus Waters Treaty, which was suspended during their spat over the last couple weeks. And this would allow tributary waters to flow back into the Indus River. If unresolved, I do think this issue could potentially reignite the war between Pakistan and India, because Pakistan needs the Indus River to be very full of water, and currently it's not. Over in the EU, the head of the European Union's trade delegation in Beijing told Beijing that the EU has no interest in doing anything with the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, which was formerly a deal on the EU gaining massive Chinese investment into EU manufacturing. And this is just the latest step that the EU has taken to say, hey, we are not moving in with China at all. We're going to either stay independent or switch back or stay close to the United States.
Do you think this is also related to, I think it was a few weeks ago, there was that issue with British Steel and China, because there's a Chinese investor who owns it, talking about shutting it down, and then the UK had to send Royal Navy ships to escort a coal ship so they could keep the furnace on. And, this is, I think, was highlighted as like a major critical infrastructure vulnerability for Europe. You think that has fueled some of this rejection of this Chinese investment?
That's probably part of it, but I wouldn't even say that's a majority. Like, you have the Chinese trying to steal Dutch, I think it was Dutch lithography equipment. It's equipment for building high quality semiconductors. You have them potentially flooding the EU with just cheap everything in an overcapacity issue, and the EU's already had overcapacity issues with China anyway. But the EU is concerned that with America potentially shutting off a lot of Chinese goods, that they would be the next theater for dumping.
All right, thank you for that, Jared.
And then the Chileans are drafting a letter to talk to the United States. They want to renegotiate the tariffs that are currently suspended, and those tariffs are on critical minerals. What Chile wants to do is actually offer a similar compliance framework to the U.S. for what they have for wood and copper, and this would potentially allow a lot greater critical mineral access down in that little lithium triangle down in South America. And lastly, the NATO foreign ministers meeting is going on right now. We discussed it a little bit last week and earlier this week. And per NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, infrastructure should be counted as defense spending for two reasons. First off, it would help them achieve the 5% that President Trump is pushing for as a baseline. Also, he says that it would, since it allows for transporting equipment in the event of a war, it should necessarily count as something that you use for defense spending, because you have to update all of your standards to update all of the infrastructure to support actually getting the equipment out.
Thank you for that, Jared. And speaking of critical infrastructure, our first warning item for today, over the last 9 months, according to people familiar with the matter, U.S. energy officials and experts have found Chinese communication devices on solar power inverters and batteries from multiple Chinese suppliers. According to these experts, these communication devices were not included in documentation for these inverters or batteries, and they could be used to remotely circumvent firewall protections that are usually installed by utility companies. We've broached this topic before when we were talking about Chinese-made step-down transformers. And the Chinese Communist Party and China linked hacker access to solar power inverters or batteries in this case would allow the CCP or hackers to disrupt electricity supply by either shutting off inverters or, as we've talked previously about in a state-level cybersecurity exercise, cause physical damage to power infrastructure through cyber attacks. Basically, with access to the inverter, they could ramp up and ramp down power supply faster than any kind of cyber security or IT expert could respond, and then cause physical damage to the power infrastructure. There was an example of not a cyber attack, but actually the inverter being shut off in November of 2024. I didn't see this really hit the mainstream news, but there were solar power inverters made by a Chinese manufacturer called Ningbo Day Inverter Technology. And they were used heavily in consumer level solar power components, and they were shut off in the U.S. and Europe by the Chinese manufacturer, and this disrupted a lot of the consumer level solar power generation. And I think it's likely that other key Chinese made technologies and components that are used in the U.S. in grids, including transformers and other components, could also be disrupted in a similar fashion, either shut off or be targeted by a cyber attack in order to cause physical damage to power infrastructure. Moving on to our next warning item, California and Illinois are dropping illegal immigrant healthcare coverage. California and Illinois, their governments are moving to end free health coverage for illegal immigrants in their states. And in California is going to require illegal immigrants to pay a $100 premium for coverage through what they call Medi-Cal, which is California's state-level Medicaid. And Illinois is actually going to entirely end government funding for illegal immigrant healthcare starting on the 1st of July. And, this is due to something I've been seeing from these states since the November election, the 2024 election, is that they're dealing with major budget issues, which they had previously during the Biden administration announced had been they'd had a turnaround on these spending problems. But I think being forced to take on more of the burden for entitlement spending at the state and local level, including things like SNAP, Medicaid, or cash benefits, is going to further hit these state budget deficits. So I think we could see more of these sanctuary states that fund illegal immigrant access to entitlement spending like Medicaid and SNAP start to reverse their own subsidies for illegal immigrants. Alternatively, these states could also start looking at raising state level taxes to meet these spending needs in order to maintain these subsidies for illegal immigrants in their states. All right, Jared, if you could come on and take us through your warning item, please.
Absolutely. So the Department of Defense published the results of a recoverable hypersonic testbed platform that was launched in March. Now, the vehicle was able to be refurbished, relaunched, and recovered inside of 3 months. So they did the initial launch in December, recovered, refurbished, relaunched, recovered, and they're in the process of refurbishing right now. This is a confirmed reusable hypersonic testbed platform, and they did it all inside of a couple months. This allows the DoD to rapidly test additional hypersonic missile components. They just have a testbed platform to strap it on, go, make sure it operates at speeds up to 3,836 miles per hour, and that's in atmosphere. Now, the DoD expects this to lower costs and development time on hypersonic weapons, and the DoD claims this is actually a return to reusable hypersonic technology. Back in 1968, they had the X-15 project, which was a manned hypersonic in-atmosphere aircraft, which you can see pictured here. Now, I do think they're correct that testing a reusable hypersonic test vehicle should significantly reduce the cost of production, which would allow the United States to significantly expand the restrike capabilities over the Chinese and close the technology gap that has been widely touted for the past few years of the Chinese supposedly having hypersonics and the U.S. not. In addition to that, I think this is a good step toward a longer term trend we've been talking about here, which is it appears the DoD and the Department of Transportation are trying to open up a space-based economy. And if you have a reusable inter-atmospheric, so able to go in space and fly inside of the atmosphere vessel, you effectively have a small craft that can actually transport goods between something in space and something on the Earth, and vice versa. This would allow the United States to establish that and actually use it in mass production, since all of this technology, by the way, is commercially available. The DoD has been partnering with commercial entities in order to make these current run platforms.
All right, thank you for that, Jared. Let's move on to questions and answers today. And our first question from Falling Lizard: is there a link to the Intel update? I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to, and that might be a Mike question.
I think you've got the questions from yesterday somehow.
Okay.
Yes, we send out the report every day, and we publish it on the app every single day.
All right, well, let's do the from Jonathan Snodgrass. Indo-Pak conflict. Were the SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, and air-to-air missiles sold to Pakistan by China ineffective?
I think that's still being determined. There are a lot of people going through the telemetry right now to figure out what worked. That said, there always has to be the question of Pakistani competence in that, as well as vice versa. Did the American or Russian SAMs work against the Chinese jets? Well, did the Indians fire it right?
Well, I think it's also just historically. So back in Vietnam, there was a study of there's numbers for air-to-air missile engagements, and it's not 100% hit effectiveness for most air-to-air missiles, because you have countermeasures. You have not just things like chaff and electronic countermeasures, but also maneuvering countermeasures and different tactics that are used to evade missiles. So it's always comes down to the enemy has a say in the effectiveness of your weapon systems by countering them or otherwise.
Yeah. So it has been confirmed. Everybody's still working on how many aircraft India lost, but India did lose aircraft. So presumably it's not a total ineffectiveness. Some missiles probably did hit some aircraft on the Indian side. And if I remember right, Pakistan confirmed they lost a couple as well. So some Indian surface-to-air missiles also hit some Pakistani aircraft, and everybody's trying to figure out the numbers right now because there's been a lot of misinformation on this.
All right, next question from Ronan. If nationwide injunctions go away, doesn't that bring the pistol brace issue back in play? That was a national injunction against ATF rulemaking. Well, it potentially could, but I think not, because the Trump administration has started issuing basically directives to the Department of Justice in the ATF, which the ATF falls under, I believe, basically saying that they're really big one. Is they're effectively telling the Department of Justice and all these federal agencies, if they have any regulations that would lead to investigations and potentially charges, to start implementing a very important aspect of criminal law, which is called mens rea. Basically, you have to have criminal intent to have broken a law under that legal doctrine. And so in that case, I think that would impact the pistol brace question first off. And then the second off, I think, the current Trump administration under Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, who I think Kash Patel is still the interim ATF director, I don't think they're going to prosecute anybody for a pistol brace right now, just based on what they've said. But it still remains to be seen if they'll follow through on some of these announcements about how the DOJ and the ATF and FBI are going to handle gun control issues. All right, moving on to the next one from Bad Wabbit. Wouldn't the India-Pakistan water issue be akin to Canada shutting down the flow of water at Niagara? In essence, shutting down the Mississippi. Yes. And this is also what's going on with in the southwest of the Colorado River Basin, the Rio Grande, between the U.S. and Mexico, is if we see something like drought conditions that cause, for example, a dead pool situation in like Lake Mead, which is part of the river flow southward towards Mexico, you could cut off water. Well, that becomes a major diplomatic and security issue between Mexico and the U.S. And I imagine something very similar would happen between Pakistan and India, and it would be akin to that, which is why we have these things like these water sharing agreements and treaties, so that one country upriver cannot shut down water flow to another country.
It is worth noting it's actually considerably more severe for Pakistan because it runs basically right along their center line, and you can actually shut down a significant portion of the Indus River, where like the Mississippi, if you look at it, it's really a river network. You're not singularly shutting that down. And even over in the Rio Grande, there are quite a few different tributaries to it that make it difficult to do that. And you also have redundancy between the, inside of the United States, where Pakistan has one river. You shut that bad boy down, and their agricultural sector starts really hurting basically within a year.
All right, next question from Ronan again. Is there any way to determine if solar inverters have those Chinese malicious devices? Any guidance yet? I have not seen that. The Department of Energy apparently is not officially acknowledging this yet. I did try to find any further information on what form these malicious devices, cellular radios or network devices, what form they are, whether it's something that like a network interface chip installed into the inverter or some other type of device. And I haven't seen anything yet. I'm sure that this is going to be developing, and there will probably be more information in the next few months on what exactly this looks like. As far as guidance, I haven't seen any guidance yet officially, but based on what I have read and heard about the installation of these types of devices or other devices and other major components that are, sold and installed in the U.S., I would just assume if you bought a Chinese component, whether it's a solar inverter or some other type of component for electrical grids, that it has some type of Chinese-made cellular radio or other network interface device, and try to find it before installing it. But this is an ongoing long-term issue. We talked about the transformer gate that happened during the Trump administration. I believe it was 2019, where they in Louisiana they took a Chinese-made transformer off of a ship, took it to Sandia National Labs. According to a leaked internal document, it did have some type of Chinese communications device installed on it. So at this point, I think it's safe to assume that any Chinese-made hardware component, especially critical infrastructure, has something like this, and it would probably be a good idea for utilities and any power companies, solar companies, otherwise, to review any Chinese-made components for something like this. All right, Frozen Nomad, do you know which companies are working on the hypersonic program you covered?
I didn't see that disclosed. I can dig deeper and see if the DoD has mentioned them at all, but it wasn't in the initial report here.
All right. Well, if that's it for our questions today, we'll be back with you tomorrow at 08 Central. Be safe and stay out front.